The pattern here has been that every time Trump gets frustrated with Putin's refusal to end the war and continued maximalist demands, he starts talking about ramping up pressure. And then he engages with Putin, who promises progress. And he says, oh, this is very constructive, very productive. And then they try to meet or they try to negotiate. And then Putin backs away, doesn't actually do anything, maintains his maximalist demands. But that crescendo of effort building up to more US pressure has been dissipated.
President Trump will meet President Putin in Budapest. There was a productive call between the pair this afternoon. Before that, though, Trump's key advisors, led by Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State, will meet with Russian counterparts next week. And of course, Zelensky visits the White House tomorrow to see Donald Trump. We understand the topic of US Tomahawk missiles will be discussed. Let's speak to the former US Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, who's with us now. Kurt, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Putin, you could argue, might have got in Trump's ear before his meeting with Zelensky. Will this change the dynamic tomorrow? Are we going to hear the words of Vladimir Putin echo around the room when Zelensky pays a visit to the White House?
Well, probably in some way. The pattern here has been that every time Trump gets frustrated with Putin's refusal to end the war and continued maximalist demands, he starts talking about ramping up pressure. And then he engages with Putin, who promises progress. And he says, oh, this is very constructive, very productive. And then they try to meet or they try to negotiate. And then Putin backs away, doesn't actually do anything, maintains his maximalist demands. But that crescendo of effort building up to more US pressure has been dissipated. That's what we saw earlier this year. It's what we saw with the Alaska summit meeting, followed by that meeting with European leaders in the White House. Now we have President Trump talking about maybe sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. And that will certainly be on the discussion agenda for tomorrow with Zelensky. But Putin is now promising a meeting, promising progress, saying we'll get there. And Trump thinks he's using Tomahawks as leverage in order to get Putin to lighten up and maybe to reach a deal. In fact, Putin thinks he's using his engagement as leverage to get Trump never to follow through.
Yeah, I mean, surely Trump is wise to that now.
Well, yes and no. On the one hand, I think he does know that Putin is playing him, that this has happened a few times now, that he lied to him at the White House when President Trump was there with all those European leaders, and Putin told him he would meet with Zelensky bilaterally, trilaterally, also with Trump, and that was a lie. And I think Trump is embarrassed by that. But at the same time, what he really wants, what Trump is focused on, is a deal to end the war. He doesn't really want to go down the road of confrontation with Putin. He wants a deal. So he's going to keep trying and trying.
Okay. I mean, where does Donald Trump go on this? Because he's only going to entertain Vladimir Putin for so long. I think he was embarrassed by Putin after the Alaska summit, and he won't want to make that mistake again. Yet he spent 2 hours on the phone to Vladimir Putin. Can I ask your opinion? Can we dig into a little bit more? What would take 2 hours? I mean, what are they discussing during that time that is going to provide significant advancements to the end of the war?
Right. Well, first off, remember that there is sequential translation. So everything that's 2 hours is 1 hour of talking. Secondly, remember that Vladimir Putin talks at very long intervals. So he might talk for 15 or 20 minutes in one shot. And then that
sounds
gets
like my worst ever interview, Kurt. If that happened to me on this show, we would just be whiling away the hours. Okay, so exactly. Putin likes to go on a bit.
But also, if you look at the White House readout, they said they talked about possible future U.S.-Russia trade, which gets at what I think Trump is really interested in and why Vladimir Putin will string this along, is that Trump really wants to lift sanctions, to do business deals and make money working with Russia. So he doesn't want to rule that out. And of course, Putin is well-trained, good KGB officer. He knows to put that out there and talk about it. I'm sure they also talked about the desire to make peace and have a new beginning and how they really all want to end the war, even though Putin's the one who continues this war. He claims to Trump that he wants to end it. And so they can talk about that. But the reality will probably be this time, uh, Trump will have the meeting a bit better prepared by having Rubio meet with a Russian delegation in advance. Remember, Alaska was so short notice, they just showed up.
Mm.
And it was a little bit misconstrued. Steve Witkoff misunderstood what he heard or what he thought he heard from Vladimir Putin. He thought they were making progress when in fact they were going backwards. I think Rubio will do a better job of trying to shape what the conversation will be. And one result of that could be if Russia maintains its maximalist demands, as it has done to now, we could very well see this Trump-Putin meeting postponed.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one, isn't it? Whether actually, or what is the direction of the direction of travel of Vladimir Putin that would get us to the point where Putin and Trump are meeting again, and also, why is Donald Trump, actively seeking business deals with a nation that he's trying to get to end a war with another nation who he appears in public to be more friendly towards now? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very complex, confusing situation, and I'm
it
not
is.
sure any of it sits particularly well with each other.
Yeah, well, it's complex, except if you're Donald Trump, where all of this makes sense.
Okay.
It
All
is
right.
all about getting an end to the war, getting back to peace, getting back to business, making money. He thinks the whole thing is senseless. He doesn't understand that Putin has a different agenda of building an empire. He thinks like you're losing lives, you're losing money, you're hurting your country, you're killing lots of people. Why not stop that and get back to peace, and then we could all do business.
But it is going to involve the delicate details of what happens to territory, what Zelensky is prepared to concede, and what Putin wants. And that's where it gets difficult, of course. We know that Donald Trump and President Zelensky spoke twice over the course of last weekend. Zelensky is at the White House tomorrow. What do you see coming of this? I mean, there's been an awful lot of talk about Tomahawk missiles, how they could be a game changer on the battlefield. But there's also discussion about actually, yes, the US could supply them because they're long range, very important pieces of weaponry, but actually they may supply so little of them, they don't really make a difference at all. Where is your head at on that?
Well, I think there is no single game changer, but every bit helps. Every bit helps shape perceptions. And for the US to be giving a new type of system that has very long range and very high payload capabilities that can hit Russian military facilities or oil facilities deep inside Russia, and they won't know which ones they are in advance, that is probably something that's going to cause Vladimir Putin to think. It may not be the final straw that breaks the camel's back, but every straw counts.
Okay. Prospects for peace. Let's just round this off by reducing it down to that. We've seen what Donald Trump's done in the Middle East. It is a ceasefire. It's a fragile ceasefire at the moment, but it is there. It is progress. How much credit do you give Donald Trump in ending this war, or at least, managing to make up significant ground to that point by the end of the year?
I think President Trump gets enormous credit for this because he was willing to say what everybody kind of knew but couldn't say, which is there is no two-state solution. There is no one-state solution. And all of this zero-summism is not ending the war. So let's instead talk about security, about economic development for the Palestinian people, and international oversight. Let's get that in place and then buy time. And a generation from now, we'll see where that goes. And that's going to create vested interests.
And
And sure enough, I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
go on.
I'm your 20-minute guest now. But sure enough, that formula brings Israel, the Gulf states, Egypt, the United States, the EU, Palestinian people all on the same page, and it isolates Hamas. And it is now, I think, largely because of that formula that the UAE and other Gulf states are really holding Hamas's feet to the fire to implement the deal now.
Look, thanks for being with us, Kurt Volker. Great to speak to you, former US ambassador to NATO.